A tall form came between us. He took a hold of the monster's neck in a tight grip, and all the limbs of the beast clawed at him, tearing out hair and cutting his face. With some effort, he kept the pressure on until he finally cracked the neck of the creature, and to my shock, twisted the head right off. When he knew it was dead, he turned towards me, and he had a bright smile on his face that didn't match the tone of the situation. "I'm so thankful to find you alive. I can't have my first friend dying." Marsh quickly came over, looking over my clearly broken arm. Behind us were Matthew and an injured Julius, his leg bloody and wrapped in some torn fabric. Marsh explained that when everything went down, he started to get his co-workers to the safe room but came back out looking for his old partner, knowing he wouldn't be able to fight. They tried getting back, but the way they came got blocked by so many of those creatures they were forced to go a different path. Marsh also found out that these creatures were pretty resistant to magic. That was a problem. Most firearms the agents used were magic, and most of the power agents relied on was also magic. On top of that, almost all of the people in the office that day never worked in the field. They were just the researchers or lab workers. Some were even weaker than humans if you took their magic away. It explained why we had already seen a few bodies, and yet we'd been able to get lucky and kill some of these monsters. By the time they found out magic didn't work, they were already being attacked. We joined back up with Matthew and Julius, trying to decide which path to take. I have a few more injured people hidden away. We have one stronger agent watching them, but without a way to get them into the safe room. I don't know where to hide them that would be as good as that, Marsh said, stressed over everything that happened so far. We stayed on high alert listening for any more creatures. The reason why I came by popped into my mind. Isn't there a hidden karaoke room? I offered. What? Matthew and Julius looked confused. Apparently, they weren't popular enough to have ever been invited to see it or thought it was a joke. Marsh's face lit up. Not thinking about the room until now. That's perfect. Those creatures won't be able to find us in there. Come along with us, he said, overly excited. He reached out his hand and I couldn't take it. For a few reasons, I couldn't go with them. At least, not until I confirmed a few things. Do you know how these creatures are getting in? As in, have you seen a door? Do you know if we can close it? And you haven't seen Nick at all, have you? I asked, the pain in my arm being dulled by the adrenaline. Nick? No, I would like to think he was on a case today. As for the doors, I didn't personally see one. From what I heard, some group did clear out the creatures near one for a few minutes. When they tried to go inside, they were repelled. A very powerful spell was keeping any kind of magic creature from going back out or breaking the spell. Not even those creatures can leave after they get inside, Marsh explained. Matthew already knew what I wanted to ask. He kept his lips tight, unsure of if he liked my unspoken idea or not. I'm not magic, I said. Marsh shook his head, not liking the statement. With my arm broken, I stood no chance at fighting too many more of those monsters. Somehow, Matthew and I might be their only hope, being the only humans in the building. He knew how to use magic and might be able to break one of the door spells. We only needed to break one. Once broken, other agents could flood in to clear up the rest of the monsters. I'll go with you, Marsh offered. You need to get Julius and the others somewhere safe. The longer we leave those doors open, the more of those things can come through. Simple as that. We need to do this right away. He chewed on his lip, thinking it over. Julius hung his head, almost as if he wanted to cry. He was from a rich family. The person he acted like when we first met was because of how he'd been raised. In the last few minutes, he'd realized how wrong he had been. Guilt overtook him over being a supernatural creature, and yet more useless than a pair of humans. Marsh didn't like the plan, but he accepted it after seeing the determined look on both of our faces. Leaning down, he carefully gave us both a hug, not wanting to let go. Head to the first floor main entrance door. At least then you'll be near the safe room and some help. I'll drop off the injured to the hidden karaoke room, then head your way. As far as we can tell, you can reach the main floor door by the stairway. None of the creatures have breached that yet. If they have, give up. I'll try to reach you too after I drop everyone off. And if your partner is in the building and I see him before you, I'll tell him to either go to the safe room or the karaoke one if the first room is unreachable. He knows the way to both. Matthew knew the way to the first floor, so I would need to follow him. The last part made me raise an eyebrow though. Why would Nicky know the way to a hidden karaoke room? I asked, unable to help myself. We drag him there all the time, trying to get him to be more social. He doesn't sing but is a great tambourine guy, Marsh said, his smile wide. Through all the pain and grief setting in, I still laughed a little at the mental image of Nick being uncomfortable, but a good sport by shaking a tambourine for them. At least he didn't lie when he said he played it. Rubbing my eyes, I almost broke down at just how many might now be missing from that hidden room in the future. Marsh awkwardly patted my good shoulder, unsure of how to deal with an emotional human. I got myself back together as we needed to push forward. Marsh created a sling from my broken arm and carried Julius over his shoulder. I'll send help to you two as soon as possible, he said, face twisted with worry. I promised that no matter what, we would meet again. With a new plan in place, I grabbed the sword again, noticing the cracks along it. I could get maybe one more battle from it before I needed to use the batons again. The gun Matthew picked up was mostly useless due to the magic bullets. We could just hope they slowed these creatures down. It took out the smaller ones just fine for some reason. We very carefully moved from floor to floor. We took the stairs and saw some signs of fighting along the way. Only 2 of the smaller monsters got in our way and we couldn't avoid. Matthew got a bad cut on his cheek from the fight, but no other serious injuries. On the 2nd floor, we started to see more of those monsters. At least we could duck inside empty rooms waiting for them to pass by. By how long it took, we would take hours to reach our goal. In the 2nd floor hallway, I heard a sound, thinking it to be a monster. Pausing to glance down, my heart leapt into my throat when I saw who it was. Bandit found a broken vending machine on its side. He was quickly putting snacks inside pouches he used for mail beforehand to be taken to the safe room. When a group of the quicker attackers turned the corner near him, I didn't even think. I ran at him, making Matthew curse furiously. He followed me, not believing we were risking our lives for a small creature. I wasn't going to lose anyone else. That included the small creepy as hell mail carriers. The fight was messy. I let one monster latch onto my bad arm so I could grab some glass from the broken vending machine to drive it into the skull. Tossing the body aside, I quickly saw I got outnumbered even if both my arms had worked. Matthew fired, taking out a few, only to have more appear. Bandit ran, his feet sliding across the floor, the rest of his body shaking. I knew if they both stayed, they would die with me. "Get out of here," I shouted at the pair. The order stunned Matthew. I wasn't needed at the front door. Matthew knew spells, I didn't. I would only slow him down. At least I managed to save one more person. Little Bandit tossed his pouches in order to run faster. Turning to face the creatures, I clutched the sword, cutting down anything that crossed my path. I couldn't tell how many fell, or how many were left when the sword shattered into pieces. I should have died. I now faced all those monsters with only 2 useless batons. And from the sounds of it, no backup. Being so close to death, I wasn't as scared as I should have been. The fear only came when Bandit came back into view. My heart dropped into my stomach as I spotted him behind me. His face was buried into the chest of one of the fallen creatures. As I fought, he'd eaten a fairly decent hole through one of the beasts. He obviously a glutton, but this wasn't any time for a snack. My attention was drawn away as I needed to hit aside one of the smaller attackers. Its mouth dripped with drool, wanting nothing more than to tear its teeth into my flesh. As I smacked him aside, as I literally got backed up against a wall, Bandit was still eating away, to the point where his entire body slipped inside the corpse. Was that safe? Would he be alright doing something like that? As long as he lived, it didn't matter what kind of gruesome act he needed to commit to do so. The body he had crawled inside started to twitch, though it wasn't possible for it to still be alive. Kicking aside one of the braver creatures, I watched as the body stood up. Pulling the glass shard from the skull, the hole healed over, and the face changed. Its features shifted to something familiar. It no longer looked like the ones attacking, but someone I could have sworn I'd seen before. He let out a yell, causing the other to look over, not understanding how someone had snuck up on them. With lightning fast movements, the one who got back up swept a kick into the crowd, one powerful enough to send a handful of monsters down the hallway, bones broken. My mouth fell open as his leg came down, crushing skulls and sweeping the creatures that nearly managed to kill me. When everything was said and done, I stood inside a gore-filled hallway with broken bodies scattered around and an oddly familiar stranger. Matthew came around the corner, holding a new sword. He knew where one was hidden on that floor, and had risked going for it. He stood, as shocked as myself seeing us alive. "Bandit?" I asked, moving slowly towards the one who saved me, seeing a bag of chips. He got down on his knees to pick it up and tear it open. Taking a few bites, he looked up, finally aware someone just said his name. "Yeah," he answered back, crunching away. "You see any of my brothers?" His face finally made sense. He looked like a numbered agent. I almost couldn't believe it. All of those agents I'd met before started out as a creature like Bandit, after burrowing into a dead body. He turned into something else. I sank down the wall, knowing 526 had been his brother. I couldn't tell him. Not yet. I should have noticed they were related sooner when both of their nails were painted. "Can you get out of that body? Go into the vents where it's safe?" I asked him, not answering his question. "No, stuck like this," he answered back, looking under crushed bodies for any more chip bags that had been left behind. "Why didn't you do this sooner?" Matthew asked as he walked over, looking at the damage. I was offended on Bandit's behalf. Changing your body wasn't an easy decision, even if the change was obvious, and something better for yourself in the long run. You needed to do it when you were fully prepared. Looking over the bodies, I wondered if Bandit was alright with this. He would never go back to the chunky small creature he'd been before, something closer to an animal than human. Guilt started to settle in my chest as I thought about whether anything would have been different if I had accepted Nick's offer so long ago. If a male body would have been strong enough to reach the daycare sooner. You get to the big room. I hope. Bandit stood up, still not dropping his simple way of speaking from his previous life yet. We're heading towards the front door, I said, standing back up and ignoring how much my arm hurt from the movement. We took a few minutes to tell him the plan. He nodded along, his arms crossed. We didn't want him to come along with us. He'd risked his life enough already. Bandit was the one who put his foot down on going with us, with a fresh new body. He could defend us. I could tell Matthew wanted to go on by himself and ask Bandit to bring me somewhere safe. He couldn't bring up the idea. We all silently agreed to press on when more of those monsters came peeking around the hallway. With another person on our side, it made moving around a little bit easier. The smaller and faster attackers roamed the hallways and could be taken down by Bandit. The bigger creatures headed towards the safe room, sensing a bigger meal inside. The stairway to the first floor was clear like Marsh told us. Sneaking along, we looked out into the front lobby, the front walls near the main door covered with tinted glass. Shapes moved beyond the glass, causing my fear to spike until I realized they were agents trying to help. No one found a way to break the glass yet to get inside the building. Each window covered with complex spells that failed to crack the glass open. Some hammered away with weapons with no result. Due to the tent, I couldn't see the features of who moved outside clearly. Only muddled colors and warped shapes. One body shape stood out and I thought it might be Charlotte, or another half-spider creature pacing around in the crowd. It must be her trying to see any signs of Matthew. I strained trying to see if Nick helped somewhere out there as well. I prayed again he wasn't inside the building. The main door opened to somewhere so dark we couldn't see. With the coast clear and no monsters in sight, we needed to act. Our footsteps echoed across the empty lobby. It alerted some fast attackers that came running down the hallway, skidding through 3 different doorways. Bandit peeled away to take care of what he could, leaving us to keep running. Matthew needed to reach the door and somehow shut it. Some of those fast attackers slipped through. He stopped to slice one in half. I couldn't stop in time. My legs kept moving towards the open door as a clawed hand reached through the darkness. Then more joined it. Through that mass of hands came a large head of a beast, jaws open. I stopped, fumbling for a weapon as the hot air from the creature ruffled my clothing. I just almost ran right into the mouth of this monster. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a familiar hair color through the tinted window. My mind raced, convinced it belonged to Nick. My heart dropped, worried that he might be able to see inside better than I could see out. One of those clawed hands came shooting out, slamming into my stomach. The force of the punch nearly knocking me over. Blood from the wound splashed across the floor as it drew back. Bandit shouted, distracted and then swarmed by the creatures he fought. Matthew pinned against a stone pillar, sword in hand without enough space to swing. My stomach got ripped open, but it didn't kill me yet. Those jaws opened, the teeth coming down. A fraction of a second until it ended my life. The entire building shook as an exploding roaring sound tore through everything. My vision went dark. A force knocked me off my feet, my mind unable to comprehend what just happened. When I woke up, my brain still felt muddled. I wasn't on the ground of the lobby. There wasn't much left where I'd stood before. Bandit reached up with another taller agent, both covered in cuts but alive. Bandit telling the other agent to be careful with my arm as they guided my body down off of wherever I ended up. Both supported my weight as we slowly started to walk along. My eyes adjusting to the new sights. The windows of the front lobby were all smashed open with agents and other people rushing inside. Most carried others to large tents set up outside in a wide, flat, grassy field. So many voices called out, either asking for help or offering it. Bodies of the attackers piled up in one spot on the grass where the agents dragged them out. As I looked, I saw glittering everywhere. Shaking my head, I focused on the sparkling and where I'd been pulled down from. The lobby was covered with large crystals sprouting from the ground and ceiling. A large bundle sparkling a mixture of deep red and golden jutting out from the floor in front of the main door, spearing the monster that almost ate me. I'd been nested safely in one of those bundles between the sharp points as they rose through the ground as if the act was planned. A great deal of the bodies of the attackers wore wounds of where those crystals impaled them, and some still have some buried inside their bodies when they got dragged outside. What? I asked, slowly finding I could stand on my own. We're not sure, the taller agent said. He heard a cry for help. Looking me over, he turned away to go over somewhere he might be needed more. I limped along, telling Bandit he could go off and help someone else. Honestly, the shock set in and I wasn't thinking straight. I watched as people carried others from the ruined building and then looked up on the outside of the office. So many of those crystals of all different sizes poked out along the sides of the large building. In my dazed state, I only thought about needing to find people I knew. Someone found me first. Charlotte did come by when the office got attacked. She ran over, grabbing my cheeks with her hands, big eyes filled with tears. She quickly gave my forehead a few kisses, thankful that I was alive. She straightened my arm sling and in the distance, I saw Matthew with Lily. They held each other and I wondered when that all started. Charlotte's voice barely registered when she spoke. She ordered me to the medical tent and also rushed off when someone shouted needing some strong hands for help. I didn't go to the medical tent. Still not thinking clearly, I offered to do what I could only to have the agents usher the weak-dazed human to get some help. I started asking people if they'd seen Nick, or about few other people I knew worried about them. A set of arms came up from behind to carefully hold me back. "I'm so glad you're alive." Turning, I looked up at Abarash, her eyes also wet, almost crying from the stress, her check with a long cut on it showing she'd been inside the office. I almost collapsed knowing she made it out safe. It was not the time or place for signs of affection. She couldn't hold back though and placed a kiss on my cheek. I opened my mouth to speak, finding my brain not working in the slightest. "Get to the medical tent, okay. I need to help out with the more seriously injured." Someone called her name in the dismiss. With some regret, she needed to leave. There weren't too many people of her skill set around. Again, I got told to get treated. I still stood, looking over the gruesome aftermath, my feet fixed to the ground. It could have been hours I stood watching, wanting to help, my body being unable to move. A large hand gripped my shoulder, a hand so large it took up the entire thing and almost half my back. "Skylar," looking up, I saw Anchor staring back down with a concerned expression that didn't suit him. His clawed hands caked in blood, his chest covered in cuts from so many battles inside the office. He said the same thing everyone else did, his hand carefully pushing me towards a tent when a growl so deep rumbled through his body and down into my shoulder. Following his line of sight, I saw who pissed him off so much. A man walked swiftly through the field, an expensive jacket over his shoulders, his polished shoes getting dirty on the grass, his gray hair slicked back, a smaller man following him. In his hand a golden cane lifted off the ground as he walked towards Anker. I didn't like the smug air about him at all. Snapping back into some sort of sense, we both turned to face him. "Who?" I started to ask. "A leader of the hunters," Anker said, only so I knew to behave in the next few seconds. I stiffened. What was he doing here? After all of this, my face colored in rage, and if Anker didn't have a hold on my shoulder, I would have lunged at the other man. "We've come to help." Now, what could have caused all this? The leader stopped, speaking in a cool tone, looking over the damage. I opened my mouth to start yelling, Anker gripping my shoulder tightly to shut me up. This talk would be political. There wasn't any proof the hunters really were the cause of the office attack. Snapping at them could fray the delicate trust both companies held towards each other. "It is too early to determine the cause," Anker started. The leader stepped back, barely able to cover his disgust needing to speak with a supernatural creature, let alone one covered in blood. "I would suspect that this was an inside job working with an extreme group of hunters we have no association with. You have been accepting some humans into the office, haven't you? And a short while later this all happens," the leader suggested, a twitch of a smile on his face. It felt if all the blood left my body. I never would suspect Matthew being in on this, but Anker might not have that mindset. Matthew, an ex-hunter that knew magic. In his eyes, he had enough reason to pull something like this, and I was human with some access to agents and God knows what other information. It looked very bad for the two of us. Looking up, I waited for the large man to explode in an anger that never came. Anker stared at the leader as if he'd just said the sky was green. "We only have employed 2 humans in the main office, on a contract worker barely with any access to the building, and is completely hopeless when it comes to magic. Motives aside, those boys know nothing, and do not have the talents to contribute to such a feat. As much as I hate to give credit to those hunter groups you so-called have no connections with, it is more reasonable to assume they stumbled into some competence than these 2 boys having anything to do with all of this." Anker was the last person I ever expected to stand up for a pair of humans. The leader's face sneered, looking down as if he'd just become aware one of those humans they were speaking about standing in front of him. Trying to defend himself and divert blame from the hunters, he looked down on me, face unable to hide disgust. "How can you be so certain those humans are on your side?" He offered, fully knowing how much Anker disliked the species, praying it was more than how much he hated hunters. The person who came in to save the conversation did so without knowing it. She swooped in, her body almost as tall as Anker, tears in the glittering red eyes. I was staring at a very big lizard, unaware of what she interrupted. "I was so worried," Hot Sauce said in her very loud voice. Unable to stop her, she placed a kiss on the side of my face, her mouth too large it covered half my mouth. Well, that was completely unexpected. The spot where she smooched hot from embarrassment and from the fact she breathed fire. When she pulled away, Hot Sauce noticed just who looked at her. Letting out a squeak, she tried to explain herself. In the end, gave up to rush away, saying she needed to help elsewhere. My mind racing, shocked over not just happened, but over the idea that if Abarash didn't work out, the other girl that I liked the most was a big fire lizard. Harlot. The whispered insult came from Anker and not from the other man. my mind moving slowly. I clued in he meant the insult about myself and not hot sauce. After all, he must have seen Charlotte, Aberash, and now hot sauce all kiss my face recently. There was no time to correct him, saying I wasn't dating any of them. Well, it appears as if one human is in the clear. Who is behind all of this is not the most pressing matter. The building blessed with power provided by the Silver King? Correct. He is not here, and yet something tore through those protections. There is nothing in their world, or any other that possessed that power. If the corporation is hiding a weapon of such power, we need to hold a meeting about it. This cannot be. As the leader spoke, my face got hot from rage again. Ankar also ceased, unable to say anything due to his position. Bodies were still being carried out. Partners didn't know who they lost, and others might be dying as we stood and spoke. For this man to be focusing on anything but that became completely unforgivable. Now isn't the time for that shit. People died. I finally shouted, cutting off his words. People? The leader slipped up. He didn't see anyone who died that day as a person. If his company wasn't behind this, he would shake the hand of the one who did it. Fuming, I knew if I did anything it would really have a major backlash. Ankar, fire me, I demanded. You're fired, he said, following my train of thought. The moment spoke, his hand lifted from my shoulder. I reeled back with my good hand and punched the leader right in the jaw with all my strength, which turned out to be a lot. Not seeing the attack coming, he fell over in the muddy grass. He sat stunned, face bruised and suit a mess. It had been a very long time since someone ever hit him. His assistant went down low to try and help, a hidden look of joy on his face. The leader started to shout half words, never so insulted in his life. If it wasn't for his assistant holding him back, we would have gotten into a fight. Ankar hooked a claw on the back of my collar to keep me from going feral and biting the man when he stood up ready to charge. The sight got us a few stares of people working behind us. Do something about him, the man shouted, losing all composure. I fired him. His actions do not reflect the corporation in the slightest. His words are true, despite the harsh language used. Now is not the time to discuss what occurred. We do not have the full picture of what happened. Bodies are still being found. My attention must go towards my agents, and then we can piece together the events of the day. It is best if you leave to cool your head and we can plan a date in the future for a meeting in a more professional setting. Face red. The leader wanted to fight back so badly. Everything Ankar said rang true though. He couldn't force his power in this situation. Anything said now would be unproductive. Cursing, he turned stomping away, saying Ankar better figure out the meeting time soon. When he got out of sight, the adrenaline started to fade from my body, making me feel weak. So much so, Ankar needed to support my weight. You're hired again. Do not do something this stupid in the future. He scolded. My opinion of him improved since we first met. He was a grumpy bastard but earned his position, and he cared about all of his agents under his care, not matter how much he didn't want to show it. When we got close enough to the tents, I could stand on my own, spotting Bandit looking around. I knew I needed to speak with him before getting my arm treated. Ankar must have known, so he let me go to the other agent instead of the tent. Why are you not resting? Bandit asked when I stopped in front of him. 526, I said and stopped. My mouth became too dry to speak. I couldn't say any more and didn't need to. A terrible expression flickered on his face when he understood what I was trying to tell him. Gathering himself up in a few seconds, he nodded. Thank you, I nearly cried from his words. Small voices caused him to look over. His other brothers, the smaller ones, walked around in a little crowd huddled together calling for their family. They all looked scared and shaken. He gave me one last thankful look and rushed over to them. None recognized him at first in a new human-like body. Then, they all cheered and piled on him. The little thing's creepy as hell, but in a cute way. A hand took my wrist to drag my body from watching them. Serval found me and wasted no time on her questions. Her front stained with blood and sleeves rolled up. Are you a virgin? She asked, making my brain go blank. Sorta of. I replied, not knowing why I admitted that to her. Good enough. I need as much blood as possible from you. Virgin blood can heal creatures and we're lacking. That was all I needed to hear. I finally followed her into the medical tent, and into a place that appeared to be a very busy clinic on the inside. All the beds full, with people rushing around. Anyone who could stand helped the more injured. She dragged me along when I nearly got away, spotting Marsh in one of those beds, his left leg missing as two people worked on other wounds. I desperately wanted to go to him, but gave up when I knew my blood would help him more. Serval found a chair and what she needed to draw blood. Working fast, she told me she'd take more than she really should, and I would pass out. I agreed, knowing this was the only thing I could do at the moment.